Hey there. Tonight we're going north, not to castles or cathedrals, but to a world shaped by ice and fire, where gods walked among giants, where fate was woven by hands no one could see, and where even immortals knew they would one day fall. You'll drift through the entire arc of Norse mythology, from the yawning void before creation to the golden halls of Asgard, from the adventures of thunder gods and tricksters to the final battle that will consume everything. You'll meet warriors who fought, knowing defeat was certain, gods who sacrificed everything for wisdom, and monsters born from chaos itself. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it actually brings you peace, so dim the lights. Let the frost settle. Let the myths unfold. And let's begin. The void and the beginning. At the very beginning, before there were gods or men, before there were mountains or seas, or even the concept of up and down, there was Ginnungagap, the mighty void, the yawning chasm. But this wasn't empty space, as we might imagine it. It wasn't black or white or any color at all. It was potential itself, pregnant with possibility, but containing nothing. No wind moved through it because there was no air. No darkness filled it because there was no light to contrast against. It was the absence before presence, the silence before the first note, the blank page before creation's pen touched it. To the north of this void lay Niflheim, the world of mist and ice. It was a realm of grinding cold, of frost so ancient it predated time itself, of darkness so complete that not even shadows could exist within it. From Niflheim flowed 11 rivers called the Elivagar, and these rivers carried not just water, but something else, something primordial and poisonous, a venom that would become the foundation of all things. As these rivers flowed farther from their source, they began to freeze, layer upon layer, building up in the void like the bones of something not yet born. To the south of Ginnungagap lay Muspelheim, the realm of fire. Where Niflheim was frost and stillness, Muspelheim was flame and fury. It roared with heat that could melt stone, with light that blazed without needing fuel, with chaos that sought only to expand and consume. At the borders of Muspelheim stood Surtur, the first fire giant, massive and terrible, wielding a sword of flame that would one day set all the worlds ablaze. But for now, he waited, as fire waits for fuel, as destruction waits for something to destroy. For ages beyond counting, these two realms remained separate, ice in one direction, fire in the other, and between them only the void. But slowly, inexorably, they began to reach toward one another. The cold of Niflheim crept south. The heat of Muspelheim pushed north. And where they met, in the heart of Ginnungagap, something extraordinary happened. The ice began to melt. Not all at once, not dramatically, but drop by drop. The venomous frost from the Elivagar met the scorching heat from Muspelheim, and as the ice melted, it formed liquid, and that liquid began to pool, and that pool began to take shape. The droplets gathered and congealed, growing larger, taking form not through any conscious design, but through the simple meeting of opposites, the fundamental alchemy of hot and cold, creation and destruction, order and chaos. And from this primordial slush, the first living being emerged. His name was Ymir, though some called him Augelmir, and he was neither god nor man, but something else entirely, something older, Ymir was a giant, the first of the frost giants, and he was born not through birth but through becoming, congealing into consciousness in the melting ice. He was massive beyond measure, ancient before age had meaning, and hermaphroditic, containing within himself the potential for both male and female, for all future generations. As Ymir lay sleeping in that primordial warmth, something remarkable happened. He began to sweat. From the perspiration under his left arm, a male and female giant formed, fully grown, emerging from his body like thoughts becoming solid. And his legs, tangled together in sleep, produced another being. This one with 6 heads, strange and terrible. These were the first Jotnar, the first giants, the forces of chaos and wildness that would forever stand in opposition to the forces of order. But Ymir could not survive on his own heat alone. He needed sustenance, and so, from the same melting ice that had formed him, another being emerged. This was Audhumla, the primordial cow, and from her teats flowed 4 rivers of milk, rich and nourishing, and Ymir drank from her and was sustained. But what did Audhumla eat? There was no grass in the void, no plants, nothing green or growing, so she did what seemed natural to her cosmic nature. She licked the salty ice that surrounded them. The ice tasted of salt and frost and possibility, and as she licked it, something began to emerge. After the first day of licking, hair appeared in the ice. After the second day, a head became visible. And after the third day, a complete being stood free from the frozen prison. His name was Buri, and he was beautiful. Where Ymir was ancient and chaotic, Buri was strong and handsome, the first of a new kind of being. He represented something different from the giants, something that would come to be called divine. Buri had a son named Bor, and Bor married Bestla, who was herself the daughter of a giant. From this union of the nearly divine and the chaotic, 3 sons were born who would change everything. Their names were Odin, Vili, and Ve. These 3 brothers looked at the world as it was, at the giants multiplying, at Ymir sleeping and sweating more beings into existence, at the void that contained everything and nothing, and they saw something that needed to change. The cosmos was still formless, still potential, still waiting to become something more than just ice and fire and the spawn of sleeping giants. So the brothers made a decision that would echo through all of time. They attacked Ymir, the primordial giant, the first living thing, the ancestor of all the frost giants, fell beneath their assault. It was not a fair fight, 3 against 1, divine against primal. And when Ymir died, the amount of blood that poured from his wounds was catastrophic. It flooded the void, a crimson deluge so vast that nearly all the giants drowned in it. Only 2 survived, Bergelmir and his unnamed wife, who managed to escape in a hollowed-out tree trunk, floating on that sea of blood until it subsided, carrying with them the seed of future giant kind, the eternal enemies of the gods. But the brothers were not finished. They took Ymir's corpse, still warm, still massive, still thrumming with primordial power, and they dragged it to the center of Ginnungagap. And there they began the work of creation. From Ymir's flesh, they formed the earth. His body became the soil, the ground, the foundation of the world. From his blood, they created the seas and lakes, all the waters that would cover the surface of the new world. His bones became mountains, great ranges of stone that pushed up from the earth. His teeth and broken bone fragments became rocks and boulders scattered across the landscape. From his hair, they crafted trees and all the plants that would one day grow. They took his skull and lifted it high above the earth, creating the dome of the sky. To hold this heavenly vault in place, they positioned 4 dwarves at the cardinal points, and these dwarves were named after the directions they would eternally support. Nordri in the north, Sudri in the south, Ostri in the east, and Vestri in the west. These dwarves had not yet existed, but they would, emerging from the maggots that had formed in Ymir's flesh, gaining consciousness through the decree of the gods, becoming beings of earth and stone, master craftsmen who would dwell in the mountains and create wonders. The brothers took Ymir's brain and flung it into the air, and it became the clouds that would drift across the sky, ever changing, carrying rain and snow. From the sparks and embers that flew from Muspelheim, they created the stars, fixing them in the heavens to give light to the darkness. They set the course of the sun and moon, establishing the cycle of day and night, summer and winter, the rhythm that would govern all life. But something was still missing. The world was beautiful, yes, with its mountains and seas, its forests and rivers. But it was empty of thought, empty of purpose, empty of beings who could appreciate what had been made. One day, Odin, Vili, and Ve were walking along the shore of the newly formed sea when they found 2 logs washed up on the beach. One was ash, the other elm, and the brothers looked at these simple pieces of driftwood and saw potential. They took the logs and began to shape them, carving and forming, and then they gave them gifts. Odin breathed into them the gift of life and spirit, the spark of consciousness that would make them more than just animated wood. Vili gave them the gift of intelligence and emotion, the ability to think and feel, to wonder and worry. And V gave them the gifts of senses, the ability to see and hear, to speak and comprehend, to experience the world they now inhabited. The man they called Ask and the woman they called Embla. These were the first humans, created not from divine substance, but from the bones of trees, given life by the gods, but fundamentally tied to the earth itself. They were mortal, unlike the gods, but they were given a world to live in, protected from the chaos of the giants by the great fence the gods had built from Ymir's eyebrows, a barrier that would come to be called Midgard, the Middle Earth, the realm of humankind. And so the cosmos came into being, formed from violence, shaped from sacrifice, carved from the body of chaos itself. But creation was only the beginning. The worlds would need structure, the gods would need homes, and the tree that connected everything was about to grow from the ruins of the void, the 9 realms and the world tree. The cosmos was not a simple place. It was not just one world, one realm, one dimension of existence. Instead, the universe the gods had created was complex and layered, a structure of 9 distinct realms, each with its own character, its own inhabitants, its own rules. And holding all of these realms together, connecting them like fruit on branches or roots spreading through soil, was Yggdrasil, the world tree, the greatest and most sacred of all living things. Yggdrasil was an ash tree of unimaginable size. Its roots delved deep into the underworlds, Its trunk rose through the middle realms, and its branches stretched high into the heavens and out to the far reaches of creation. The tree was not just a structure or a symbol. It was alive, conscious in its way, suffering and enduring, home to countless beings, and absolutely essential to the existence of everything. If Yggdrasil were to fall, all the worlds would fall with it. The name Yggdrasil itself carried meaning. Ygg was one of Odin's many names, and Drasil meant horse or steed, so Yggdrasil could be translated as Odin's horse, a strange name for a tree until you understood that in Old Norse poetry, a gallows was called a horse because the condemned would ride it to their death, and Odin would one day hang from this tree for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, sacrificing himself to himself, dying and not dying to gain the wisdom of the runes. The tree would be his gallows, his steed, the instrument of his suffering and enlightenment. The tree had 3 great roots, each one delving into a different realm. The first root stretched to Asgard, the realm of the Aesir gods, and beneath this root was Urdabrunna, the well of fate. This was the most sacred of waters, and beside it sat the 3 Norns, the weavers of destiny. Their names were Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, representing past, present, and future, and they tended the well and watered the roots of Yggdrasil every day to keep the tree from rotting. They also wove the threads of fate for every being in existence, god and giant, elf and dwarf, human and beast. Even the gods were subject to the Norns' weaving, and even Odin could not change the fates they decreed. The second root stretched to Jotunheim, the land of the giants, and beneath it was Mimisbrunna, the well of wisdom. This well was guarded by Mimir, one of the wisest beings in existence, and the waters of this well contained knowledge of all things past and present. Odin would one day give up his eye for just 1 drink from this well, and even that would not satisfy his hunger for knowledge. The third root delved into Niflheim, the primordial realm of ice and mist, and beneath it was Vergelmir, the roaring cauldron, the spring from which all rivers flowed. This was the oldest of the 3 wells, the source of the Elevaga rivers that had helped create Ymir in the beginning. But Vergelmir was also a place of darkness and gnawing destruction. The tree was home to many creatures, and not all of them were friendly to each other or to the tree itself. At the very top of Yggdrasil, in the highest branches that scraped the roof of heaven, perched an eagle. This eagle had no name that we know, but it was enormous and wise, and between its eyes sat a hawk called Vedarfolnir, who could see even farther than the eagle itself. The eagle's wings, when they beat, created the winds that blew across all the worlds. At the bottom of the tree, gnawing at the roots in Niflheim, was Nidhogger, a massive serpent or dragon whose name meant malice striker. Nidhogger chewed constantly at the roots of Yggdrasil, trying to destroy the tree, motivated by nothing but ancient hatred and hunger. Around Nidhogger writhed countless other serpents, all of them working to bring down the world tree, all of them failing but never stopping. Running up and down the trunk of Yggdrasil was a squirrel named Ratatoska, whose name meant roughly drill tooth or boar tooth. This squirrel had a very specific job. It carried insults between the eagle at the top and the dragon at the bottom. It would run down the trunk and tell Nidhogger what terrible things the eagle had said about him. Then it would scamper back up and tell the eagle what vile responses Nidhogger had made. The squirrel was a gossip and a troublemaker, but it kept running, kept the insults flowing, kept the ancient enmity alive between high and low, between sky and depth. 4 stags also lived in the branches of Yggdrasil, and their names were Dain, Dvalin, Dunair, and Durathror. These stags ate the leaves and buds of the tree, not out of malice like Nidhogger, but simply because that was their nature. They too were slowly consuming Yggdrasil, contributing to its suffering, and yet the tree endured. Despite the gnawing, the browsing, the constant attacks from creatures both above and below, Yggdrasil stood. The Norns watered its roots with the sacred water from their well. The tree healed, struggled, suffered, but survived. It had to survive. Everything depended on it. Now let's talk about the 9 realms themselves, the worlds that hung on or grew from this great tree. Asgard was the highest realm, the home of the Aesir gods. It was a place of golden halls and impossible beauty, a fortress built in the sky and connected to the mortal world by Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge. Asgard was where Odin held court in his hall called Valhalla, where half of all warriors who died in battle came to feast and fight until Ragnarok. It was where Thor lived in his hall called Bilskirnir, and where Frigg had her hall called Fensalir. The walls of Asgard had been built by a giant in a complex bargain that had nearly cost the gods dear, and those walls surrounded the realm, keeping it separate from the chaos beyond. Asgard was the seat of power, the center of divine authority, the place where the gods gathered to pass judgment and make decrees that would affect all the worlds. Vanaheim was the home of the Vanir, the other tribe of gods. The Vanir were associated with fertility, prosperity, wisdom, and the ability to see the future. They were older than the Aesir in some ways, more tied to the earth and to natural cycles. The 2 tribes of gods had once fought a terrible war against each other, the Aesir-Vanir War, which had ended in a truce and an exchange of hostages. Njord, Freyr, and Freyja had come to live in Asgard as part of this exchange, and they brought with them their magic and their knowledge. Vanaheim itself was less clearly defined in the surviving myths, but it was said to be a place of green growing things, of magic that came from the earth rather than from the sky, of gods who understood the deeper patterns of existence. Alfheim was the realm of the light elves, beautiful and radiant beings who were associated with light and air and beauty. It was said to be the most lovely of all the realms, a place of eternal summer and golden light, where the elves danced and sang and created works of art that could make even gods weep. The light elves were not gods, but were divine in their own way, close to the Vanir in their nature, and Alfheim was considered a place of peace and beauty that the darker forces of the universe rarely touched. Midgard, of course, was the realm of humans. It sat in the middle of everything, connected to Asgard by the Rainbow Bridge, surrounded by the great ocean where the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, lay coiled around the entire world, biting its own tail. Midgard was where Ask and Embla's descendants lived, where they built their halls and farms, where they struggled and loved and died, never quite achieving the order of Asgard, but never falling into the complete chaos of the giants' realm. Midgard was a place in between, a battleground where gods and giants often clashed, where heroes could rise to legendary status, where mortals tried to make sense of a world that was far stranger and more dangerous than they could fully comprehend. Jotunheim was the realm of the giants, the Jotuna, and it was vast and wild and dangerous. It lay to the east of Midgard, beyond great rivers and dark forests, and it was a place of towering mountains and deep valleys, of bitter cold in some regions and blazing heat in others. The giants who lived there were the enemies of the gods, though that relationship was complex. Some giants were allies, some were lovers of gods, some were wise beyond measure, but many were hostile, representing the forces of chaos and destruction that constantly threatened the order the gods had established. Jotunheim was home to Utgard, a fortress whose name meant beyond the yard or outside the fence, representing everything that existed outside civilization and control. Svartalfheim or Nidavellir was the realm of the dark elves and dwarves, depending on which text you read and how you interpreted the confused and sometimes contradictory sources. The dwarves were master craftsmen, the greatest smiths in all the worlds, and they lived in halls carved deep underground, in caves and mines and places where the sun never reached. They had created many of the gods' most powerful treasures, including Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Odin's spear Gungnir, and the golden hair of Sif. The dwarves were cunning and often greedy, but they were also incredibly skilled, and the gods needed them almost as much as the dwarves needed the gods' protection. Muspelheim, the realm of fire, still existed as it had from the beginning, a place of flames and heat, ruled by the fire giant Surtur. It was a hostile realm where few beings could survive, a place of lava and burning ash. And it was home to the fire giants who would one day march to war at Ragnarok. Muspelheim represented pure destructive force, and it waited at the southern edge of creation like a sword waiting to fall. Niflheim, the realm of ice and mist, also remained from the beginning, cold and dark and ancient. It was here that the spring Vergelmir roared, and here that Nidhogger gnawed at the roots of Yggdrasil. Niflheim was also closely associated with Helheim, though some sources separated them and some combined them into one concept. Helheim, or Hel, was the realm of the dead. It was ruled by Hel, the daughter of Loki, a being who was half living and half corpse, beautiful on one side and decayed on the other. Helheim was not a place of punishment in the Christian sense. It was simply where most dead people went. It was cold and dark and somber, and the spirits there lived a shadowy half-life, neither suffering nor particularly happy, simply existing in a muted echo of what they had been. The entrance to Helheim was guarded by a terrible hound named Garm, and the realm itself was separated from the living world by rivers that could not be crossed except in death. These 9 realms were not stacked neatly on top of each other like layers of a cake. They existed in complex relationship to each other, connected by the branches and roots of Yggdrasil, reachable through certain paths or magical means, sometimes overlapping at the edges. The exact geography was unclear, and probably intentionally so. What mattered was that they were all connected, all part of the same cosmic structure, all dependent on the great tree that held them together. And every day, the gods would ride to the base of Yggdrasil to hold their council, to pass judgment, to discuss the affairs of the worlds. They could not use the Bifrost Bridge for this because the heat from their passing would set it aflame, so they forded rivers and traveled on foot or horseback. gathering beneath the spreading branches of the world tree to govern the cosmos they had created from the body of a giant. The tree suffered. It was wounded and gnawed upon and beset by creatures that wanted to destroy it. But it endured, and as long as it endured, the worlds would continue to exist, the gods would continue to rule, and fate would continue to weave its inexorable pattern toward an ending that everyone could see coming, but no one could prevent. The gods of Asgard. In Asgard, high above the mortal world, the gods lived and schemed and loved and fought. They were not perfect beings. They were not all-knowing or all-powerful. They had flaws and fears, desires and regrets. They could be noble and they could be petty. They could create wonders and they could cause disasters. They were, in many ways, like humans, but magnified, given immense power, but also given immense responsibility, living lives that would span ages, but knowing, always knowing, that they too would one day die. At the head of them all sat Odin, the All-Father, the chief of the Aesir. Odin was the god of wisdom, war, death, poetry, magic, and a dozen other things. He was tall and usually old in appearance, with a long grey beard and only one eye, the other having been sacrificed for wisdom. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a cloak that changed colours, and he carried the spear Gungnir, which never missed its target. 2 ravens sat on his shoulders, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, and these ravens flew out across all the worlds every day, and returned every night to whisper in Odin's ears everything they had seen and heard. 2 wolves followed at his heels, Geri and Freki, and he rode the 8-legged horse Sleipnir, the fastest and best of all horses, who could gallop across the sky and down into the underworld with equal ease. Odin was obsessed with knowledge. He had sacrificed his eye to drink from Mimir's well. He had hung himself on Yggdrasil for 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, suffering without food or water, until the knowledge of the runes came to him in a vision. He wandered the world in disguise, appearing as an old man in a cloak, testing heroes and learning secrets. He knew that Ragnarok was coming, that he would die in the final battle, devoured by the wolf Fenrir, and so he gathered warriors in Valhalla, preparing for a war he knew he could not win, but would fight anyway. Odin was wise, but not kind. He was powerful, but not merciful. He played a long game, manipulating events across generations, and he was feared as much as he was respected. Thor was different. Where Odin was complex and mysterious, Thor was straightforward. He was the god of thunder, the protector of Midgard, the enemy of giants, and the most popular god among common people. Thor was huge and strong, with red hair and a red beard, fierce eyes, and an appetite that could empty a feast hall. He wore a belt called Megingjord that doubled his already enormous strength, and iron gloves called Jarngriper that allowed him to wield his hammer. And that hammer, Mjolnir, was the most famous weapon in Norse mythology, forged by the dwarves and capable of leveling mountains, slaying giants, and always returning to Thor's hand after he threw it. Thor drove a chariot pulled by 2 goats, Tangrisnir and Tangniost, and when he rode across the sky, the rumble of his chariot's wheels was what mortals heard as thunder. When he struck his hammer, lightning split the heavens. Thor was not particularly clever, but he was brave and loyal and dedicated to protecting the world from the giants who constantly threatened it. He spent much of his time traveling to Jotunheim to fight giants, and the gods relied on him to be their champion in battle. He would one day fight the Midgard serpent at Ragnarok, and though he would kill the beast, its venom would kill him in turn. But for now, he was the defender, the hero, the god who mortals called upon when they needed protection. Frigg was Odin's wife, the queen of the gods and the goddess of marriage, motherhood, and foreknowledge. She knew the fates of all beings, though she rarely spoke of what she knew. She lived in her hall Fensalir in Asgard, and she was beautiful and wise and deeply connected to the domestic sphere. She was also a mother who would suffer the greatest loss, for her son Balder would die through trickery, and though she had tried to protect him by extracting oaths from all things not to harm him, she had overlooked the mistletoe, and that oversight would prove fatal. Balder was the god of light and purity and beauty. He was Odin and Frigg's son, and he was beloved by all the gods for his goodness and fairness. Balder had disturbing dreams of his own death, and when he told his mother, Frigg went throughout all the worlds and made everything swear an oath not to harm him. Every plant, every animal, every stone, every metal, every disease. But she thought the mistletoe too young and harmless to bother with. After all the oaths were given, the gods would amuse themselves by throwing weapons at Balder, knowing nothing could hurt him. But Loki, the trickster, discovered the one weakness and fashioned a dart from mistletoe. He gave it to Balder's blind brother Hod and guided his hand, and the dart pierced Balder's heart, and the god of light fell dead. It was the beginning of the end, the first domino falling toward Ragnarok. Loki was perhaps the most complex figure in the entire Norse pantheon. He was not one of the Aesir by birth. He was the son of giants, but Odin and Loki had become blood brothers in their youth, and so Loki lived in Asgard among the gods. He was a shapeshifter and could become a salmon or a seal or a fly or a mare. He was clever and charming and often helpful to the gods, solving problems they couldn't solve themselves, talking his way out of impossible situations, retrieving treasures that had been stolen. But he was also a liar and a schemer, and his tricks often caused as much trouble as they solved. Loki had fathered 3 monstrous children with the giantess Angrboda. The first was Hel, the goddess of death, whom Odin cast into the underworld to rule the dead. The second was Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, whom Odin threw into the ocean, where it grew so large it could encircle the entire world. The third was Fenrir, a wolf who grew so large and fierce that the gods eventually had to bind him with magical chains. These children would all play crucial roles in Ragnarok, fighting against the gods who had cast them aside. But Loki's most infamous child was Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse. This had come about through one of Loki's stranger adventures. When Asgard needed walls built to protect it from giants, a builder had come and offered to do the job in exchange for the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freyja. The gods agreed, thinking he could never finish in time, but his stallion Svadilfari was so strong and tireless that the builder was going to succeed. The gods panicked and blamed Loki for suggesting the bargain, so Loki transformed himself into a mare and lured Svadilfari away. The builder failed to complete the walls, and later Loki gave birth to Sleipnir, the fastest horse in all the worlds, which he presented to Odin. After Balder's death, the gods' patience with Loki's tricks ran out. They hunted him down, and when they caught him, they bound him beneath the earth with the entrails of one of his own sons, and they placed a serpent above him so that its venom would drip onto his face forever. Loki's wife Sigyn stayed with him, holding a bowl to catch the venom. But when the bowl filled and she had to empty it, the venom would fall on Loki's face, and he would writhe in agony, and his writhing caused earthquakes. There he would remain until Ragnarok, when he would break free and lead the forces of chaos against the gods. Freyja was the most beautiful of the goddesses, the Vanir deity of love, beauty, fertility, war, and death. She rode a chariot pulled by cats, wore a cloak of falcon feathers that allowed her to fly, and owned the necklace Brisingamen, the most precious jewel in all the worlds. Freyja was a practitioner of Seda, a form of magic that was powerful but considered somewhat shameful even for a god to practice, and she had taught this magic to Odin. She received half of all warriors who died in battle, taking them to her hall Folkvanga, while Odin took the other half to Valhalla. She was fierce in battle and tender in love, and she wept tears of gold when her husband Odd wandered away and was lost. Her brother Freyr was the god of prosperity, sunshine, and rain, and he was the lord of Alfheim. He owned a ship called Skidbladnir that could be folded up and put in a pocket when not in use, but could hold all the gods when unfolded. He also owned a boar named Gullin Bursti, whose bristles glowed in the dark and who could run faster than any horse through air or water. Freyr gave up his sword for love, trading it to win the hand of the giantess Gerd, and this would prove fatal, for without his sword he would fall at Ragnarok to the fire giant Surtur. Heimdall was the watchman of the gods. He lived in a hall called Himinbjorg at the end of the Bifrost Bridge, and his job was to guard the entrance to Asgard against giants and other threats. Heimdall needed less sleep than a bird, could see for hundreds of miles by day or night, and could hear grass growing and wool growing on sheep. His horn, Gjallarhorn, would be blown to signal the beginning of Ragnarok, and its sound would carry to all the 9 worlds. Heimdall would fight Loki at Ragnarok, and they would kill each other. Tyr was the god of war and justice, the bravest of the gods. He had only one hand, having lost the other to the wolf Fenrir. When the gods decided they needed to bind Fenrir because he was growing too large and dangerous, they told him it was a test of strength and asked him to let them tie him with magical chains. Fenrir was suspicious and demanded that one of the gods put a hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. Only Tyr was brave enough to do it. When Fenrir realized the chains were magical and could not be broken, he bit off Tyr's hand. Tyr would face the Hound Garm at Ragnarok, and they too would kill each other. There were many other gods and goddesses as well. Bragi, the god of poetry, whose words could charm anyone. Idun, the keeper of the golden apples that kept the gods young. Njord, Freya and Freya's father, the Vanir god of the sea and sailing. Skadi, the giantess who became a goddess and the embodiment of winter and hunting. And countless others, each with their own stories, their own halls, their own roles in the complex web of divine affairs. The gods were not omnipotent. They could be tricked, wounded, even killed. They relied on Idun's apples to stay young. They needed fortifications to protect themselves from giants. They made mistakes and suffered for them. And they knew from the prophecies and from the very nature of fate itself that they would not live forever. Ragnarok was coming, and when it came, almost all of them would die. This knowledge colored everything they did, every decision, every moment of their existence, the adventures and trials. The gods did not spend their time merely sitting in golden halls. They traveled, they quested, they fought, and they got into all manner of trouble. Their adventures form the heart of Norse mythology, tales of trickery and strength, wisdom and folly, triumph and humiliation. These were stories that taught lessons, entertained, and revealed the character of the gods themselves. One of the most famous adventures began when Thor awoke one morning to discover that his hammer Mjolnir was missing. This was catastrophic. Without Mjolnir, Thor could not protect Asgard from the giants. Without Mjolnir, the gods were vulnerable. Thor was furious, and his fury shook the halls. He immediately sought out Loki, as one does when something has gone missing or wrong, and demanded help finding the hammer. Loki borrowed Freya's falcon feather cloak and flew across the worlds searching. And eventually he discovered that the hammer had been stolen by a giant named Thrym. Thrym had buried it 8 leagues beneath the earth and declared he would only return it if the gods gave him Freya as his bride. When Loki returned with this news, the gods gathered in council. They asked Freya to dress as a bride and go to Jotunheim, and her response was immediate and violent. She refused so vehemently that her necklace Brisingamen broke from the force of her anger. So Heimdall, often wise in council, suggested an alternative plan. Thor himself would dress as a bride. Thor, as one might imagine, was not pleased with this suggestion, but even he had to admit they had few options. So Thor, grumbling and cursing, put on a bridal gown and veil. They hung Brisingamen around his neck to complete the disguise, and Loki volunteered to go along dressed as a bridesmaid to help with the deception. They traveled to Jotunheim in a goat-drawn chariot, and Thrym welcomed his bride with great excitement, preparing a massive wedding feast. Thor, still in disguise, proceeded to eat an entire ox, 8 salmon, and all the delicacies meant for the women, then drank 3 casks of mead. Thrym was somewhat taken aback by his bride's appetite, but Loki quickly explained that Freya had been so excited about the wedding she hadn't eaten in 8 days. When Thrym tried to lift the veil to kiss his bride, he recoiled from the burning, angry eyes he saw beneath. Again, Loki had an answer. Freyja had been so excited she hadn't slept in 8 nights, hence the fierce eyes. Satisfied, Thrym called for Mjolnir to be brought forth and laid in the bride's lap to sanctify the union. The moment Thor's fingers closed around the handle of his hammer, he threw off the disguise and began slaying giants left and right. He killed Thrym, Thrym's sister, and likely several other giants who had the misfortune of attending the wedding. Then he and Loki returned to Asgard, hammer recovered, dignity somewhat bruised, but intact. Another famous adventure involved Thor's journey to the hall of Utgard Loki, a giant king whose name meant Loki of the Outlands, though he was not the same being as the trickster god. Thor, Loki, and 2 human servants named Thialfi and Roskva traveled into Jotunheim, and along the way they encountered a massive hall. They sheltered there for the night, but were disturbed by earthquakes and strange, rumbling sounds. In the morning, they discovered that what they had thought was a hall was actually the glove of a giant named Skrymir, who was so enormous that his thumb had served as a side room. Skrymir journeyed with them for a time, carrying all their supplies in his bag, but when they camped and tried to open the bag to get food, they found it tied with knots they could not undo. Thor, frustrated and hungry, struck Skrymir 3 times with Mjolnir during the night, mighty blows that should have shattered mountains. But each time, Skrymir merely woke briefly, wondering if a leaf or an acorn had fallen on him, then went back to sleep. In the morning, Skrymir directed them to Utgard and went his own way. When they arrived at Utgard, the giants there mocked them for being small, and Utgard Loki challenged them to contests to prove their worth. Loki entered an eating contest against a being named Logi and lost, for Logi ate not just the meat but the bones and the trencher itself. Thialfi raced against a boy named Hugi and lost by a wide margin. Thor was challenged to drink from a horn, and though he drank deeply 3 times, the level barely seemed to drop. He was challenged to lift a cat, and though he strained with all his might, he could only lift 1 paw off the ground. He was challenged to wrestle an old woman named Ellie, and she brought him to 1 knee. Humiliated, the group prepared to leave, but as they departed, Utgard Loki revealed the truth. Everything had been an illusion, giants' magic designed to confound even the mighty Thor. Logi, who had beaten Loki in eating, was actually wildfire, which consumes everything. Hugi, who had beaten Thialfi in racing, was thought itself, faster than any physical being. The horn Thor had drunk from was connected to the sea, and though he had not emptied it, he had lowered the ocean level enough to create the tides. The cat he had tried to lift was actually the Midgard serpent in disguise, and the fact that he had lifted even 1 paw was astounding. The old woman Ellie was old age itself, which defeats everyone eventually, and the fact that Thor had stayed on 1 knee was remarkable. Even Skrymir had been an illusion, and Thor's blows had actually struck mountainsides, creating deep valleys. Utgard Loki admitted that he had been terrified by Thor's actual strength and had used magic to humble him, and he begged Thor never to return to Utgard, for if Thor came in anger, knowing the truth, nothing could stand against him. Thor raised Mjolnir to strike, but Utgard and its castle vanished like morning mist, leaving Thor and his companions standing in an empty field. It was a reminder that even the gods could be deceived, that strength alone was not always sufficient, and that the giants possessed their own forms of power. Odin had his own quests, most of them for knowledge rather than glory. His sacrifice on Yggdrasil has already been mentioned, but it deserves fuller telling. Odin sought the knowledge of the runes, the magical symbols that held power over reality itself. But this knowledge came with a price, so Odin stabbed himself with his own spear Gungnir and hanged himself from a branch of Yggdrasil. For 9 days and 9 nights he hung there, wounded, without food, without water, looking down into the depths below. On the 9th night, as he was about to lose consciousness, he saw the runes in the dark waters beneath him. He reached down, gathered them up, and the knowledge flooded into him. He understood their shapes, their meanings, their power. He understood how to use them for magic, for healing, for cursing, for knowledge, for protection. When he finally cut himself down from the tree, he was transformed. Now the master of the runes, capable of magic that few other beings could command. Odin's other great sacrifice, the giving up of his eye, happened at Mimir's well. Odin came to the well seeking to drink its waters of wisdom, and Mimir, the guardian of the well, told him the price was high. Odin asked what price would be sufficient, and Mimir said simply that it would cost him an eye. Without hesitation, Odin plucked out his own eye and dropped it into the well, and Mimir allowed him to drink. The knowledge Odin gained was vast, but not complete. He saw much of what would come, including his own death at Ragnarok, but he could not change it. Knowledge without power to alter fate was its own form of torment. Odin also had numerous dealings with giants, sometimes hostile, sometimes not. He once seduced the giantess Gunnlod to steal the mead of poetry, a magical drink that granted anyone who tasted it the ability to compose beautiful verse. The mead had been made from the blood of a being named Kvasir, who was so wise that no one could ask him a question he couldn't answer, and it was kept by a giant named Suttung in a deep mountain chamber, guarded by his daughter Gunnlod. Odin transformed himself into a snake and bored through the mountain to reach the chamber. There he seduced Gunnlod, and she allowed him 3 drinks of the mead. But each drink was from a different vessel, and in 3 drinks Odin drained all 3 containers, consuming all of the mead. He then transformed into an eagle and flew back to Asgard, with Suttung in eagle form chasing him. As Odin flew over Asgard's walls, he regurgitated the mead into vessels the gods had prepared, though some of it spilled over the walls and fell to Midgard, which is why some humans have the gift of poetry. The gods also dealt with the problem of prophecy. They knew that Ragnarok was coming, and they knew roughly how it would unfold, but they could not prevent it. This led to a kind of tragic fatalism that colored many of their actions. When they learned that Loki's children with Angrboda would bring destruction, they took action, but not action that actually prevented anything. They simply delayed it and perhaps made things worse. They took Hel and cast her into Niflheim, where she became the ruler of the dead, growing bitter and resentful. They took Jormungandr and threw him into the ocean, where he grew to enormous size, creating a constant threat. And they took Fenrir and attempted to bind him. The wolf was charming as a pup, and the gods raised him in Asgard, but only Tyr was brave enough to feed him as he grew. Eventually, Fenrir became so large and fierce that the gods decided he needed to be restrained. They challenged him to a test of strength, binding him with chains. Fenrir broke the first chains easily. He broke the second chains as well. So the gods commissioned the dwarves to create a magical binding called Gleipnir. It was made from 6 impossible things: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Because these things don't exist, Gleipnir appeared as a soft, silken ribbon, but it was unbreakable. When the gods showed Fenrir this ribbon and asked him to let them bind him with it, he was suspicious. He demanded that one of them place a hand in his mouth as a pledge that they would free him if he could not break the binding. Only Tyr agreed. Fenrir allowed himself to be bound, but when he tried to break free and found he could not, he bit down, severing Tyr's hand at the wrist. The gods drove a sword through Fenrir's jaws to keep them paired open, and saliva dripped from his mouth to form a river. They then chained him to a boulder deep underground, where he would remain until Ragnarok, growing ever more angry, ever more ready for revenge. These were not the actions of wise gods preventing disaster. These were the actions of beings trying to postpone the inevitable, and in doing so, guaranteeing that when the end came, it would be even more terrible than it might have been. The death of Balder. The death of Balder was the turning point, the moment when the age of the gods began its inevitable slide toward Ragnarok. It was a tragedy born of love, fear, deception, and an overlooked detail that would doom the world. Balder was beloved. That cannot be overstated. He was the most beautiful of the gods, the most pure, the most kind. His face shone with light, and his presence brought joy. He was married to the goddess Nanna, and their love was deep and true. He lived in a hall called Breidablik, and it was said that nothing impure could exist in that place. Balder represented all that was good about the gods, all that was worth preserving. But Balder began to have dreams, dark dreams, dreams of his own death. Night after night, he would wake from visions of darkness and ending, and though he told no one at first, the dreams weighed on him, dimming his usual brightness. Eventually, the other gods noticed. Balder, the god of light, was troubled, and if Balder was not well, then something was deeply wrong with the world. Frigg, his mother, immediately took action. She loved Balder more than anything, and she would not accept that he might die. So she went throughout all the worlds, traveling to every corner of existence, and she made everything swear an oath not to harm Balder. She spoke to fire and water, to iron and all metals, to stones and earth, to trees and plants, to diseases and poisons, to animals and birds. She spoke to everything that was and asked them to promise they would not hurt her son, and everything agreed. Everything swore the oath willingly, for Balder was so beloved that even inanimate objects did not wish him harm. When Frigg returned to Asgard, the gods tested Balder's new invulnerability. They would throw stones at him, and the stones would veer away before striking. They would shoot arrows, and the arrows would turn aside. They would swing swords, and the blades would refuse to cut. It became a game, a celebration of Balder's protection, and the gods would laugh as they tested him, marveling at how nothing could harm him. But Loki watched, and Loki wondered. He was not the kind to accept that something was truly invulnerable. There was always a weakness, always an exception. So Loki disguised himself as an old woman and went to visit Frigg. In conversation, he asked about Balder's protection, and Frigg, proud and relieved, explained how she had extracted oaths from everything in existence. Everything? Loki asked innocently. Absolutely everything? Well, Frigg admitted, there was one thing, a small plant that grew west of Valhalla, a mistletoe. It had seemed so young and harmless that she had not bothered to ask it for an oath. Surely something so small and soft could never harm anyone. Loki left, and he went immediately to find the mistletoe. He cut a branch of it and fashioned it into a dart, sharpening the tip, making it just long enough and just hard enough to pierce flesh if properly aimed. Then he returned to Asgard, where the gods were still amusing themselves throwing things at Balder. Hod, Balder's brother, stood apart from the others. Hod was blind and could not participate in the game. Loki approached him with false sympathy, saying that it was a shame Hod could not honor his brother like the others were doing. He offered to help, to guide Hod's hand so that he too could throw something at Balder and join in the celebration. Hod agreed gratefully. Loki placed the mistletoe dart in Hod's hand, positioned him carefully, and guided his arm. Hod threw. The dart flew true. It struck Balder in the chest, piercing his heart, and the god of light fell dead without a sound. The silence that followed was absolute. The gods stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Balder, invulnerable Balder, beloved Balder, lay dead on the ground. Nanna, his wife, collapsed in grief. Frigg screamed. The sky itself seemed to darken. It was the worst thing that had ever happened in Asgard, worse than any defeat in battle, worse than any insult from giants. Balder was dead, and the age of peace and light died with him. They prepared a funeral, worthy of a god. They built a massive pyre on Baldur's ship, Ringhorn, the greatest ship ever built. They laid Baldur's body on the pyre, dressed in his finest clothes, surrounded by treasures and offerings. Nanna, overcome with grief, died of a broken heart and was laid beside him. Even Baldur's horse was killed and placed on the pyre so he would have a steed in the afterlife. They tried to launch the ship, but it was so heavy that even the gods could not move it, so they called for a giantess named Hyrrokin, who rode a wolf with a serpent for reins. She pushed the ship so hard that the rollers beneath it caught fire and the earth shook. Thor blessed the funeral with his hammer. Odin placed his ring Draupnir, which created 8 new rings every 9th night, on the pyre. Representatives from all the 9 worlds came to honor Baldur, even giants and dwarves, for everyone had loved him. They lit the pyre, and as the flames consumed the ship, they watched Baldur and Nanna sail into the darkness, into Hel's realm, where the dead went and from which few returned. But Frigg was not willing to accept this. She asked for volunteers to travel to Helheim to bring Baldur back. Hermod the Brave, another of Odin's sons, volunteered immediately. He rode Sleipnir down the long, dark road to the realm of the dead, riding for 9 nights through valleys so dark and deep that he could see nothing. Finally, he reached the gates of Helheim, guarded by the maiden Modgud, who asked his name and business. He explained he was searching for Baldur, and she said that Baldur had indeed passed that way and was now within Hel's halls. Hermod rode on and found the gates of Hel's realm itself. Sleipnir, the magical horse, leapt over the gates in a single bound, and Hermod entered the hall where the dead gathered. There he found Baldur, sitting in a place of honor, but pale and silent, already becoming like the other shades. Hermod pleaded with Hel, the goddess who ruled this realm, begging her to allow Baldur to return to the living. Hel, who was half living and half corpse, considered. She said she would release Baldur on one condition: if everything in the world, living and dead, would weep for him. If all of existence mourned Baldur and wanted him back, then she would let him go. But if even one thing refused to weep, he would remain in her realm forever. Hermod rode back to Asgard with this news, and the gods immediately sent messengers throughout all the worlds asking everything to weep for Baldur. And everything did. People wept, animals wept, plants wept, stones wept. Even metals wept, shedding moisture like tears. All of creation mourned Baldur and wept for his return. All except one. In a cave sat a giantess named Thok. When the messengers came and asked her to weep for Baldur, she refused. She said she had never loved Baldur in life and saw no reason to weep for him in death. "Let Hel keep what she has," Thok said coldly. The messengers returned with this news, and Baldur was lost forever, doomed to remain in Helheim until Ragnarok and beyond. And the gods suspected, many knew, that Thok had been Loki in disguise. Loki had caused Baldur's death and then prevented his resurrection. It was treachery beyond forgiveness. The gods hunted Loki down. He tried to hide, transforming himself into a salmon and hiding in a waterfall, but the gods caught him with a net. They dragged him to a cave deep underground, and there they bound him with the most cruel punishment they could devise. They took his son Nari, or Narfi, and they transformed his other son Vali into a wolf. And Vali, maddened and unable to recognize his brother, tore Nari apart. The gods took Nari's entrails and used them to bind Loki to 3 rocks. Then they placed a serpent above Loki's face so that venom would constantly drip onto him. Loki's wife Sigyn, who had remained loyal despite everything, sat beside him with a bowl to catch the venom. She would sit there for ages, catching the drops. But when the bowl filled and she had to turn away to empty it, the venom would fall on Loki's face. He would writhe in agony, and his writhing caused the earth to shake, creating earthquakes. And there he would remain, bound and suffering, until the chains broke at Ragnarok. Baldur's death marked the end of the golden age of the gods. The light had gone out of the world, and darkness gathered at the edges of everything. The gods knew now that the end was truly coming. They had seen prophecy fulfilled, had witnessed death that should not have been possible, had lost the best of them, and they could feel the weight of fate pressing down, dragging them toward the final battle they knew was coming. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, the twilight of the powers, the end of everything. It was the one prophecy that everyone knew, that everyone feared, and that no one could prevent. From the moment of creation, perhaps even before, Ragnarok had been waiting at the end of time, inevitable as death, certain as winter. The prophecy had been spoken by the Norns, revealed in visions, whispered by oracles, and Odin himself had learned of it in his quest for knowledge. He had hung on Yggdrasil and drunk from Mimir's well specifically to understand what was coming, to see if there was any way to prevent it or survive it. But the more he learned, the clearer it became. Ragnarok was fated. The gods would die. The world would be destroyed. Nothing could change this, but knowing and accepting are different things. So Odin gathered warriors in Valhalla, the Einherjar, the honored dead who had fallen in battle. He selected the bravest and strongest fighters from among the mortal dead, and every day they would feast in his hall, and every day they would fight each other to keep their skills sharp, and every night they would be resurrected to feast again. They were Odin's army, being prepared for a war that would come at the end of time, a war they could not win but would fight anyway. The signs of Ragnarok were clear in the prophecies. First would come 3 winters with no summer between them, the Fimbul winter, a time of cold so severe that it would kill crops and freeze rivers solid, turning the world into a wasteland of ice and hunger. During this time, all bonds would break. Brothers would turn on brothers. Fathers would fight sons. Greed and hatred would consume humanity, and none of the old rules would hold any meaning. It would be an age of axes, an age of swords, an age of wolves, before the world itself collapsed. The wolves that chased the sun and moon, Skoll and Hati, would finally catch their prey and devour them, plunging the world into darkness. The stars would disappear from the sky. The earth would shake with constant earthquakes as Loki writhed free of his bonds. The mountains would crack and crumble, and from all the far places, the enemies of the gods would begin to march. In Helheim, the dog Garm, who guarded the gates of the dead, would break free from his chains and howl with a voice that could be heard across all the worlds. In Jotunheim, the giants would hear the call to war. From the east would come Hrym, steering a ship made from the fingernails of the dead, a vessel called Naglfar, filled with giants ready for battle. The Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, would rise from the ocean depths, thrashing and writhing, causing enormous waves to flood the land. Venom would drip from its jaws, poisoning the sky and sea. The serpent would crawl onto the land, making its way toward the final battlefield. Fenrir, the great wolf, would break free of his magical bonds at last. His jaw would stretch so wide that the upper jaw would touch the sky, and the lower jaw the earth, and fire would burn in his eyes and nostrils. Nothing would stop him now. He would bound toward Asgard with his son Hati and all the wolves of chaos following him. From Muspelheim, in the south, Surtur would finally make his move. The ancient fire giant, older than the gods themselves, would ride out with his legions of fire giants, his sword blazing like a second sun. As they crossed the Bifrost Bridge, the Rainbow Bridge would shatter and collapse behind them, burned away by the heat of their passing, forever severing the connection between Asgard and the mortal world. And Loki, freed from his bonds, would not stand with the gods who had imprisoned him. He would captain the ship Naglfar, steering the giants toward Asgard, his eyes full of centuries of hatred and pain, ready to watch everything burn. The gods would see the armies coming. Heimdall, the watchman, would blow the Gjallarhorn, and its sound would be heard across all the 9 worlds. It would be the call to the final battle, the signal that Ragnarok had come. Odin would don his armor and call the Einherjar, his army of the dead. Thor would grip Mjolnir. Tyr would arm himself, despite having only one hand. Freya, who had given away his sword for love, would fight with an antler. All the gods would march out from Asgard to the plain called Vigrid, the battlefield where destiny would unfold. And what a battlefield it would be. It was said to be 100 leagues in every direction, a massive plain where the final fate of the cosmos would be decided. The gods would line up on one side, the Einherjar behind them, ready to defend Asgard and all they had built. On the other side would be the giants, the fire demons, the dead from Helheim, the monsters, and Loki leading them. The sky would be dark, the earth would tremble, and the battle would begin. Odin would ride at the front, his spear Gungnir gleaming, his ravens on his shoulders. He would seek out Fenrir, the wolf who was fated to be his death. They would meet on that field, the All-Father and the monster, wisdom against chaos, order against revenge. The battle would be fierce, but in the end, the prophecy could not be denied. Fenrir would swallow Odin whole, devouring the king of the gods. But Fenrir would not have long to savor his victory. Vidar, one of Odin's sons, called the Silent God, would step forward. Vidar wore a shoe that had been made from all the leather scraps ever discarded by shoemakers throughout time, accumulated over ages for this very moment. He would step on Fenrir's lower jaw with that shoe, grasp the upper jaw with his hands, and tear the wolf's mouth apart, killing the beast that had slain his father. Thor would face Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, his ancient enemy. They had met before, when Thor had tried to fish the serpent up from the ocean and nearly succeeded. Now they would meet for the final time. The battle would shake the earth. Thor would strike the serpent with Mjolnir again and again, crushing its skull with mighty blows until the creature finally died. But in killing the serpent, Thor would doom himself. He would take 9 steps backward from the corpse, and then the venom that poured from Jormungandr's jaws would overcome him. The Thunder God, the protector of Midgard, would fall dead.